Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the creepiest mystery that has not been solved that you know of? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. The Cleveland Torso Murderer. From 1935 to 1938, there was a serial killer who chopped off the heads and appendages of 12 to 20 people and left their torsos for people to find. The famous detective Elliot Ness was on the case, and the killer taunted him by leaving 2 torsos within full view of his office. The killer was never identified, nor were the majority of the victims. Bobby Dunbar. In Louisiana in 1912, little kid went missing with his family at their cabin in the swamp after going out exploring with his brother, I believe, and friends and family. They came back and the boy was missing. A large search was conducted, which consisted of throwing dynamite in the rivers and deeper ponds to see the bottom if he drowned, killing alligators and cutting them open to see if he was eaten, but it was all to no avail. A year later, he was spotted in Mississippi with a man who claims the boy was not Bobby Dunbar, although they had similar appearances. The Dunbar family came and the mom was positive it was Bobby, even though the boy showed no joy or emotion upon seeing the mother. They battled in court for custody, but the mother of the boy was a poor prostitute, so the judge took favor of the Dunbars and claimed it was their son. He spent the rest of his life thinking he was Bobby Dunbar. Way after, I believe, one of Bobby's grandkids or great-grandkids did a DNA test with the actual Dunbar just to see if they found him, and the test showed they did not match up. The boy who grew up as Bobby was never Bobby. No one knows what happened to the real Bobby to this day. The disappearance of Marilyn Berson. Marilyn Berson was a music-loving multilingual party girl who moved from Quebec City to Montreal in 2005. A few years later, she up and moved back to Quebec City to live with her parents. It became obvious to her family that something terrible had happened. Marilyn acted deeply troubled, but her family could not get her to talk to them. Marilyn specifically said that her troubles did not have to do with a relationship, drugs, or debts. When her mother asked if she had been assaulted, Marilyn did not respond and instead began to cry. Her mother suggested she talk to a psychologist. A friend of Marilyn's tried to get her to explain what had happened, and Marilyn only told him that it was worse than or witnessing a crime. One night, Marilyn went for a walk and never returned. There have been multiple reported sightings of her, most of them unconfirmed and none of them recent. This is a disappearance case that presents 2 different questions, beside the standard, where is she? What happened to Marilyn in Montreal? The case of Asha Degree. A 9-year-old North Carolina girl left her home on a rainy night on Valentine's Day of 2000 and was never seen again. There are lots of weird elements to the case, and it happened in a smaller North Carolina town and a more rural county. Christine Skubish. Christine was driving in a remote part of California with her 3-year-old son Nick in the back. Several drivers called police to report a naked woman on the side of the road. Police arrived that night, found nothing, and returned the following morning once sunlight was available. The police found Christine's car in a deep embankment, dead, and still strapped to her seat. She died on impact. Her son Nick was alive and crying in his back seat. The reports spoke of a woman turned with her face to the ground, motionless along the side of the road. Police are adamant the naked woman seen is not Christine. She was fully strapped, fully clothed, and would not have been able to crawl up the embankment even if she had been alive. The skid marks pointed to an unfortunate accident of Christine skidding off Highway 50 in the unlit area. The car would not have been visible from the top of the road, especially at night. Christine's family holds firm that it was Christine from beyond the grave trying to bring attention to her son. It isn't well known, but a guy from my hometown disappeared like 30 years ago and has never been found. He would leave for months at a time and then come back after not being in contact with his family. They expected him back eventually, so they didn't report him missing for 2 years. The sisters and parents still have hope he shows back up, obviously expecting he won't, and as far as I know, his parents haven't touched his room since he left. Edit. To say that he was known to hitchhike to California and spend time in Colorado on the way there. The family said that the last time they saw him was in February, so I think he died somewhere in Colorado, maybe froze to death. Texas killing fields. 30-plus bodies found with only 3 convictions, 2 of which died before confessing. The other messed up thing is that it was discovered by accident. Police were investigating a shallow grave when a canine unit picks up scents from a nearby area. Police guess there's way more bodies, but the area is too unstable to bring in equipment to dig up anything. Theories range from serial killer syndicate to police inside job, but there's not concrete evidence toward anything. I'd love to know what happened to my middle school Latin teacher. He'd been employed at my school for many years and then suddenly vanished one week during my freshman year. The school was completely hushed about it, so none of us ever got answers. He was replaced after 2 months and nobody ever heard from him again. Internet searches have brought up nothing. Was he a pedo? Did he just want to retire in peace? Did he die? I may never know. One of the creepiest things, I think, is not one but many missing and murdered Indigenous women. I live in South Dakota, and Native women end up missing or murdered all the time. Nothing's ever done. They get murdered and the case gets closed before any real investigation gets done, or they just go missing and never found again. I have friends that had their cousins go missing and murdered, and nothing was ever done to find them. So there's a group of people going around my state doing unthinkable things and getting away with it. Creeps me out. I'm married to a Native woman, and because of what I know, I never let my wife or daughter go out alone. There's a local man that went missing almost 15 years ago. He walked out of his house at night, this was in the 80s, and was never seen again. There was another younger man that disappeared within the same area, only he drove to a back road and left his truck and was never seen again. I still see posters and appeals for information on both these men. Both are cold cases. I find any mystery which involves someone going missing, in the absence of any clear abduction taking place, to be the creepiest or at least the most intriguing. I totally understand that there's usually a most likely explanation in these cases, e.g. the person died somewhere remote where they can't be found, was washed away at sea, but the fact that we don't know for sure is what I find creepy. Just one recent example from the state I live. Jaden Penno-Thompson. Basically, 2 young lads go on a road trip up east coast of Australia with a bunch of drugs to meet up with some friends for a New Year's party. They do some drugs along the way. At one stage in a small rural area, get into a fight over some of the drugs going missing, and one gets out of the car and storms off and is never seen again. Friend doesn't initially report him as missing because they were both in possession of a shitload of drugs. I'm sure there's some very logical explanation for it and why he was never found, but the fact that he simply wasn't found is what creeps me out. I mean, I've never heard that story before, and I'm sure they investigated it, but if the last person was a person that had a lot of drugs on them, and then that other person disappeared, I'm assuming that first suspect is his friend in the car, right? Gotta be. There's an unsolved murder from almost 40 years ago around San Diego that recently made news again. The crazy thing is, someone I know knows who did it and has written evidence from the killer. It's been tormenting them for all these years, and they finally spoke with detectives about it. It's been almost a month and I haven't heard any updates, but we'll see what happens. The body recycling chemistry unveiled by the CCP. For context, I'm a chemist, and as such I keep tabs on the current literature on various topics that are either useful for my work or simply interesting. However, I once found a paper on human waste recycling, which seemed to be quite ordinary. However, once you read past the abstract, you would realize they're talking about decomposing human cadavers to repurpose said molecules. It was a morbid idea, and their experimental section did have some pertinent information as to how they did it. They would dissolve in concentrated NaOH, then extract and purify. I'm vulgarizing a lot. This was back in 2017. Then COVID hit, and I wanted to show this paper to a new intern but all the information on the author, previous papers, and so forth were scrubbed clean. It was like it never happened. A colleague who was Chinese then told me, "Oh yeah, sometimes the CCP does that to use ideas for themselves and not share. This implies that they may have used this idea during COVID for human body recycling. However, I'm unsure as to how true that may be." The InterGIC murder case in the 1920s in Germany. Andreas Gruber, his wife Casilia, their daughters Victoria's two children, Casilia and Josef, and the family maid Maria Baumgartner were all brutally murdered with an axe-like weapon. The murders took place at night, where 4 of the victims were either lured to or taken to the tool shed on the property. The other 2 victims were murdered in their beds. There were clear signs that the perpetrators remained on the farm for several days after the killings, eating meals and tending to the livestock. Strange occurrences had been reported for months leading up to the murders, such as noises coming from the attic and a newspaper found on the property that didn't belong to the family or family's neighbor. In the day before the murder, the family found unexplained footsteps in the snow coming from the woods, with no returning footprints, as well as a set of keys went missing. Many searches by the family were done, but nobody was found. Despite a thorough investigation, the case remains unsolved, and no definitive motive or suspect has ever been identified. The fact that everyone seems to know exactly who killed Joshua Maddox, but nothing happened to the killer. He was found upside down in the chimney of an abandoned cabin with a plank blocking the bottom of the chimney, so he could not have escaped. And their explanation for how he got in there and then blocked himself in there did not make sense. It stands out to me because someone from the town posted here on Reddit, I think at this very sub, that they knew the guy Andy who was last seen with Joshua. He bragged about doing it. Everybody knew he did it. They told the police exactly who did it. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès case. One of the most recent cases is that of Chevaline. The Ligonnès affair excited France in the spring of 2011. On April 21st, several weeks after the mysterious disappearance of the Nantes family, investigators discovered the bodies of Agnes Dupont and Ligonnès and his 4 children buried under the terrace. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès is, of course, the main suspect, especially since his actions in the months and days preceding the disappearance of his family are more than doubtful. Rifle shooting lessons, closed bank accounts, cement and bags of lime purchased in large quantities, cryptic messages on internet forums, strange letters to his family, all elements giving the impression of a premeditated act. The most widespread thesis is that of a slow descent into hell, that of a ruined man unable to cope with his loved ones. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès will be seen one last time in Navarre, before disappearing completely this time. Nobody knows what happened to him, but everyone sees him in the 4 corners of the globe. This one never got picked up by any press except my hometown paper, and even then, just like 1 or 2 articles. A woman who was a former low-level employee of said paper died. She was pretty young and without health issues. The autopsy report came back months later. She had died of thallium poisoning, and that was it. Never another mention of it. Foul play suspected, but never any suspects. It just dropped off the radar. It's not a common thing at all. Why? Is anyone even investigating it? The Jack family is a weird one for me right now. Maybe not the creepiest, but pretty creepy. Ronnie Jack was in the midst of looking for work. One night he was in a bar, it was late, and he met a guy who offered him a job up at a logging camp. When Ronnie expressed his concerns for his family, the stranger told Ronnie to bring them, and that his partner, Doreen, would also have a job. There would also be childcare for the 2 children, Russell and Ryan. The stranger told him to go home and pack, and they would set off right away. So in the middle of the night, this family of 4 packed and drove off with a stranger. The entire family was never heard from, and no trace has ever been found. No one knew the stranger, and no camps in the area were hiring at the time. I really find it creepy, because what would be the motive to include the entire family? An adult or 2, I guess I could see. Robbery, though this family was fairly poor, or murder for various reasons, or If it was just the kids, that's another thing, but to take an entire family as just one individual, it just doesn't make a logical or killer type sense. Why did my step-grandparents have a lock on the outside of the door of the little room in the back of their attic? Does it have anything to do with undiagnosed but clearly present psychopathic traits? Or that most of his kids and grandkids want nothing to do with him? He worked for the railroad and could travel freely and undetected from state to state during the period of time where it seems the most serial killers were active in America. Will there be some kind of deathbed confession? If not, is it because he has no remorse or empathy? Was my grandfather a deranged murderer or just kind of a dick with low empathy? I have a few I think of often. Most of them have the similar motif of a probable reason of disappearance, but a body has never been found, and those poor families have never had closure. It must be torture to live like that. The disappearance of Lars Matank is probably my number one. It's not the head trauma and erratic behavior I find bizarre, but rather the complete disappearance and haunting footage of him sprinting out of the airport. Also, Brandon Swanson, Brian Schaefer, and Timothy Pitson. This guy, Chance Angelbert, went missing in Gering, Nebraska while visiting his in-laws in 2019. He went with his in-laws with his wife and 3-month-old baby for the 4th of July. On the 6th, he went golfing with his father-in-law and brother-in-law, then called his wife to pick him up over comments made about his new job. When they came back to the house, Chance got out of the car and started walking off. His wife called him, no answer, so she went looking. He answered her call later saying he was walking south. Later, friends said he was walking north. The last person he talked to was a friend on the phone, and then he sent his aunt a weird message. A storm rolled in. In-laws looked for him, called law enforcement. There's been multiple alleged sightings in New England and Wyoming. Some people suspect the wife's family has him under their driveway. The Yuba City Five. 5 men each suffering from some mental disability disappear after a basketball game. Their car is found abandoned on a road they shouldn't have been on. A few months later, one was found dead in a forestry trailer several miles from the car. 3 more bodies were found in between the trailer and abandoned car. The 5th man was never found. No one knows why they went up that road or abandoned the car. Probably not as creepy or as horrifying as some of the others mentioned, but I've always wanted to know what happened to Ben McDaniel. He was a cave diver who went on an unsanctioned dive and never returned. Evidence points to him not having died in the underwater cave system he was last seen entering, but no one has found him or his body since. Some of the most experienced cave divers in the world have tried to find his body down there and haven't been able to, and don't think he's down there. No one knows what happened to him. The disappearance of Amy Bradley from a cruise ship in the late 90s. There have been multiple reported sightings of her that suggest she'd been sold into human trafficking on the other side of the world, and a couple photos of her from a trafficking website have been uncovered but unconfirmed. Those pictures and the idea of what this poor woman could be going through scare me to no end.